Welcome back to This Month in M&A. Today, we're going to talk about two reg packages that address the taxation of partnerships. And here to walk us through the partnership rules is Ryan Dobens. Ryan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jacob.
So Ryan, this first reg package addresses the allocation of partnership liabilities under Section 752. Now, this is not a new concept, but what's new about these regulations?
So these regulations focus on the classification of recourse liabilities in making a partnership tax allocation.
Okay, so let's back up. As an initial matter, the partnership rules distinguish between a recourse and a non-recourse liability. Ryan, what's important about that distinction?
It is important, Jacob. A recourse liability is generally allocated completely to a particular partner in the full amount of the borrowing. The benefit of the allocation is that that partner can go ahead and receive additional tax-deferred cash distributions, or it can get additional tax deductions up to the full amount of the borrowing. You know, this is in contrast to a non-recourse liability, which still has pretty much the same tax benefits, but that's allocated to each of the partners in accordance with their profit-sharing percentage. So it's going to be an amount less than the full amount of the borrowing.
So even a corporate tax guy like me can see that a partner can get an additional benefit by having a partnership liability classified as recourse.
Yeah. You know, Jacob, maybe you're not so square after all.
Well, what do you know? So with these basic concepts in mind, what's new about this reg package?
So this reg package deals with guarantees, indemnities, and other similar type arrangements in making that classification of a liability as recourse to a partner.
So under the old rules, any person except a disregarded entity can make a payment obligation, and it would be deemed satisfied for purposes of classifying the partnership liability as recourse. So what changed in this reg package?
So the IRS and the Treasury Department have kind of long been worried about abuse in this area. You know, they were kind of worried that people were entering into different types of payment obligations, really just stuffing them in a drawer somewhere. Basically, these new final regulations take the position that generally payment obligations are respected unless there's a attempt by the person entering into it to either avoid the payment obligation or the payment obligation itself is just commercially unreasonable.
So that is a key point. Now, the other aspect of these regulations address bottom dollar payment obligations. Ryan, could you explain what those are?
Sure. A bottom dollar payment obligation is kind of a conditional type payment obligation. You know, a good example of this is, let's say that a partner guaranteed $10 of a $100 partnership liability. Well, let's say if you look at the terms then of the guarantee, the payment obligation would only mean something at a point where $90 of the $100 loan had already been in default and become uncollectible. You know, the IRS and Treasury Department really don't believe that these types of payment obligations have any kind of real economic risk.
So that's an example of what is a bottom dollar payment obligation. Do the regulations provide any guidance as to what is not a bottom dollar payment obligation?
Yeah, so this brings us to another key takeaway from the final regulations. You know, they say that a payment obligation can be, a maximum stated amount, so it doesn't have to be the full amount of the borrowing. They state that payment obligation can relate to a fixed percentage of each dollar of the, actual borrowing, so not necessarily all, but a fixed percentage. Lastly, they state that, joint and several liability does not in itself cause a payment obligation to become a bottom dollar payment obligation and, of course, ignored. You know, they're just looking for ways to find real economic risk in these payment obligations.
Another important point, Ryan. So let's turn to the second reg package. These rules address the allocation of partnership liabilities for purposes of the disguised sale rules. So perhaps we discuss how the allocation of a partnership liability can trigger the application of the disguised sale rules.
So absent the disguised sale rules being in place, Jacob, a person could go ahead and have appreciated property. They could go ahead and borrow money, on that appreciated property, and then effectively have the cash in hand, while at the same time contributing the same property to a partnership subject to the same liability. Well, the consequence of this, absent the disguised sale rules, would be that the partner would have effectively cashed out of an appreciated asset on a tax-deferred basis and shifted the burden of repayment of the liability onto their other partners.
So we have the disguised sale rules to curb that abuse. So I think we need to understand a little history to appreciate how this reg package fits in.
Yeah, so historically, the liability allocations between non-recourse and recourse have kind of been taken into account in the disguised sale analysis. Then in October 2016, the Treasury Department and the IRS had issued temporary regulations which would have effectively ignored the recourse liability allocations, but just for disguised sale purposes. About a year later, in October 2017, the Treasury Department issued a report in response to a Trump executive order, which basically said that they were re-examining the temporary regulations and their outcome, to kind of determine if it was the right approach.
So how do the new rules handle the allocation of partnership liabilities for purposes of the disguised sale rules?
So the final regulations basically take the approach of the pre-October 2016 rules. Said another way, both non-recourse and recourse liability allocations are generally respected as part of the disguised sale analysis.
So we're back to where we were before October of 2016.
For disguised sales, we are, Jacob.
Excellent, Ryan. Very insightful. Thanks for stopping by. For additional information on these reg packages or this month's other guidance, please refer to the newsletter or contact your local PwC professional or any member of the M&A team.